Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into some pretty intense stuff. We're going to be looking at chapters 10 through 12 of the book of Job.
Ah, Job. Yeah, he really gets hit hard, doesn't he?
He does. And in these chapters, we see Job and one of his friends, Zophar, going head to head on some of life's biggest questions, about suffering, about God, about, well, just what it means to be human.
And it's not just like a dry philosophical debate. The way Job's emotional state comes through, the metaphors, the imagery, it's really powerful stuff.
Oh, absolutely. In chapter 10, for example, the way he compares himself to clay molded by God and then seemingly discarded.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful image.
Mm.
Really emphasizes that feeling of betrayal Job's going through.
And the questions he throws at God. Do you have eyes of flesh? Do you see as mankind sees? I mean, you really feel how deeply misunderstood he feels.
And then he even goes as far as to accuse God of favoring the wicked while punishing the righteous. Bold statement really reveals the depth of his anguish.
Definitely. And then there's this, I don't know, this heart-wrenching image of Job longing for death, wishing he'd never been born. It just shows how deep his despair runs.
Yeah, heavy stuff. And then enter Zophar, one of Job's friends, comes on the scene. You'd think to offer some comfort, right?
You would think. But Zophar takes a completely different approach.
He does. Zophar's coming from that perspective that suffering is a direct consequence of sin.
So basically, Job, you're suffering, therefore you must have sinned.
Pretty much. Chapter 11 is basically Zophar saying, Job, your words are meaningless. You can't even begin to comprehend God's infinite wisdom.
Ouch. I gotta admit, I'm already kind of struggling with Zophar, but maybe that's the point, right? To make us uncomfortable.
Well, he does try to phrase it delicately, at least. He uses vivid imagery, compares God's depths to the heavens and Sheol, the realm of the dead, trying to emphasize how vast God's wisdom is.
Right.
He's saying we can only grasp like a tiny part of it. He even suggests that God actually holds back on judgment, forgets some of Job's guilt.
Forgets guilt. Interesting. Doesn't that imply a limit to God's omniscience? How does that fit in with traditional theology?
Great question. And it really gets to the core of Zophar's dilemma.
Hmm.
See, he's trying to balance God's justice with the seemingly random suffering in the world.
By suggesting there's a hidden justice we can't comprehend.
Exactly. It's a concept that's resonated with a lot of people throughout history.
So Zophar is basically advocating for blind faith, accepting God's will even when it doesn't make sense to us.
Right. He advises Job to repent, turn back to God, and then he'll be restored. And this is where we start to see that central tension emerge. Job feels unjustly punished, demands answers, while Zophar is all about surrendering to God's will, no questions asked.
And Job isn't having any of it.
Nope. Chapter 12, Job fires back, full of sarcasm, rejecting those easy answers his friends are offering.
Yeah, you can tell he feels mocked, misunderstood.
He even says, truly then, you are the people, and with you wisdom will die. Basically dismissing their so-called wisdom, pointing out how they just don't get it.
And then he brings up this point about wicked people seeming to prosper while good people suffer. Sounds like he's making a case for the injustice of it all.
He is. He's rejecting all the traditional wisdom, all those platitudes they're throwing at him. He's not content with those surface-level answers. He wants a deeper understanding, even if it means challenging his whole faith.
And it's fascinating how he turns to nature. He asks the animals, the birds, the earth itself to teach him about God's ways. It's like he's searching for a different kind of wisdom.
It's a huge turning point. It shows that Job, even with all the anger and pain, he's still yearning for a connection with God, just not in the way his friends are suggesting. And when he turns to nature, his language, it becomes so poetic, so evocative, like he's trying to grasp the incomprehensible through the sheer power of the natural world.
Yeah, the imagery is incredible. God controlling the waters, drying up the earth, sending floods, overthrowing social orders, making fools of judges, revealing secrets from the darkness.
It's amazing. Job, just a moment ago, was questioning God's justice, and now he's acknowledging this absolute power over creation. He recognizes God can do anything, holds the fate of nations, but
But he still can't reconcile that power with his own suffering. It's almost like he's saying, okay, you're all powerful, but why me? Why am I going through this?
that's the paradox at the heart of it all. He's grappling with these fundamental questions about God and suffering, questions that have haunted people for, well, forever.
Yeah, it reminds me of how people often question their faith when they go through something awful or when they see innocent people suffering. It's a natural human response, trying to make sense of pain.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating about this section of Job is that we see both sides of the struggle. We have Job crying out, demanding answers, and then Zophar advocating for acceptance, submission to a higher power. Two sides of the same coin, and both valid in their own way?
And neither one is presented as being right or wrong. It really leaves it up to us as readers to grapple with these arguments, to come to our own conclusions. And honestly, I appreciate that the text doesn't offer easy answers because, well, life doesn't either.
That's one reason why Job still resonates with people today, I think. It doesn't shy away from the tough questions. It allows space for doubt, questioning, which is such an important part of any real faith journey.
So we have this tension building, right? Job's raw emotion and questioning versus Zophar's insistence on God's wisdom. Where does that leave us in the bigger picture?
It highlights the complexity of faith. It shows us that it's okay to wrestle with these things, to doubt, to ask those hard questions. Faith isn't a blind acceptance. It's about engaging in a genuine dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable.
And what strikes me is how Job and Zophar use language so differently to get their points across. Job's language is all raw emotion, while Zophar's is more reasoned, theological. It's like they represent two different ways of dealing with pain and suffering.
That's a great point. It speaks to the diversity of human experience. There's no one right way to respond to tragedy. Some need to express their anger, their grief openly, like Job. Others find comfort in theological explanations, the idea of a larger cosmic order, like Zophar.
But even Zophar's approach, while it might come from a good place, it seems to lack empathy for Job's pain. It's like he's minimizing it by saying, well, God knows best.
I see what you mean. It does highlight the limitations of trying to apply a one-size-fits-all answer to individual suffering. What comforts one person can feel dismissive to another.
Going back to Job's response in chapter 12, there's so much sarcasm there.
Yeah.
And it feels like some of that anger is directed at God as well as his friends.
Absolutely. When he says, I am a joke to my friends, there's real bitterness there. He feels abandoned by God, betrayed by his friends, completely alone.
And he even challenges their intelligence directly. I have intelligence as well as you. I'm not inferior to you. Like, don't patronize me. You have no idea what I'm going through.
He's rejecting their attempts to simplify his suffering, to offer those easy answers. He wants a deeper understanding, a real engagement. He doesn't want to be patted on the head. He wants to be heard.
And it's in that space of feeling unheard that he turns to nature. It's like he's saying, if humans can't give me answers, maybe the natural world can.
And maybe that's where the real wisdom lies. Not enforcing our human understanding onto the divine, but recognizing our limits, being open to God's presence in unexpected places, even in the midst of suffering.
Which brings us back to those powerful descriptions of nature. Do you think there's a shift in Job's tone when he's talking about God's power in nature?
I think there is a subtle shift. There's still anger, frustration, but also a sense of awe, wonder. Like, by contemplating creation, he's forced to acknowledge a power beyond human comprehension.
The image of God depriving the leaders of the earth's people of intelligence and making them wander in a pathless wasteland, that really struck me. It's humbling, you know? Even the most powerful people are ultimately at God's mercy.
It speaks to the fleeting nature of human power versus the enduring power of the divine. Job's acknowledging that even in his suffering, there's a bigger cosmic order at play.
But does that mean we just accept suffering passively? Does recognizing God's power negate our need for justice, for action?
That's a really profound question. And honestly, I think that's one that the book of Job leaves open. It challenges us to wrestle with it, to search for our own answers.
Because sometimes the questions are more important than the answers.
Maybe.
It's about wrestling with our faith, with our doubts, with those big questions that we might never fully understand.
Yeah. And finding those moments of connection, those glimpses of hope, even in the midst of darkness.
Job's journey is a reminder that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about the journey itself, the seeking, the questioning, the wrestling, and maybe, just maybe, finding a little bit of peace along the way.
Beautifully said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Job, everyone. We'll be back next time with another exploration of, well, whatever mysteries we stumble upon. It really does feel like we keep coming back to that core question, huh? Why suffering? Why does a just and powerful God allow it?
Yeah. It's a question that's been around forever. Theologians, philosophers, everyone's tried to figure it out. And ultimately, it's something we each have to grapple with on our own.
And what I find interesting is that Job, even with all his anger and pain, he seems to be moving towards a deeper understanding of God. It's not that he's rejecting God, it's more like he's wrestling with those seeming contradictions, between God's power and what he's experiencing.
Right. He's not settling for easy answers.
Yeah.
He wants a more real, more authentic relationship, one that can hold both doubt and faith.
So if we were to pull out some key takeaways from these chapters, what would they be? What do we learn about God, suffering, and just trying to make sense of it all?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that honesty is crucial in our relationship with God. Job shows us it's okay to bring our anger, our doubts, our despair, all of it, to God. It's okay to question, to wrestle with those tough emotions. In fact, it can be a really important part of a real faith journey.
It's like faith isn't about pretending everything's fine when it's not. It's about that dialogue, even when it's hard.
Exactly. And another key takeaway is realizing that human understanding has limits. Both Job and Zophar, they struggle to grasp why Job's suffering. Zophar tries to force a theological explanation that just doesn't quite work. Job turns to nature, recognizing how vast creation is, how little we really understand.
It's humbling to admit we don't have all the answers, and maybe that's okay. Maybe the most honest response is just to acknowledge the mystery, to sit with those questions without needing to tie them up in a neat little bow.
I agree. And I think Job also highlights the need for empathy when someone's hurting. Zophar, even though he means well, he just doesn't get it. His attempts to comfort Job fall flat because he can't truly understand Job's pain.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the best thing we can do for someone who's suffering is to just listen, acknowledge their pain, just be there with them in it. Trying to explain it away or offer easy solutions, that often does more harm than good.
For sure. Real comfort comes from understanding, not from forcing someone else's experience into our own limited way of thinking.
So if we admit we might never fully understand why God allows suffering, what does that mean for our faith? How do we understand justice then?
That's the question, isn't it? And I think Job encourages us to lean into the struggle, to wrestle with those tough questions without expecting to find some easy answer. Maybe the journey itself, the seeking, is just as important as finding a solution.
Maybe it's about learning to trust, even when it doesn't make sense, to keep looking for meaning, even in the dark.
And finding those glimpses of the divine, not just in our religious teachings, but in nature, in the human spirit, in those moments of grace that can surprise us even when things are tough.
This deep dive into Job, I hope it's given everyone some things to think about, some new ways to approach these age-old questions about faith and suffering and searching for meaning.
And maybe even inspired you to look a little closer at the world around you, to listen more deeply to those who are hurting, to keep that conversation going with more empathy, more humility, more openness.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.